Heather Grant, and as quilters, color is an important part of what we do. Today we're here with Luana Rubin, who's a color expert. Tell me about your experience as a color expert, Luana.
Well, I've been really fortunate to have discovered the Color Marketing Group several years ago, and this is an international group of color forecasters and trend watchers who get together several times a year to figure out what the new color trends are going to be a couple years in the future.
Oh wow, that sounds fascinating. And so you recently went to Cuba.
Yeah, I've been to Cuba 3 times in the last year, and that's because every time I go, I fall in love with the colors of Cuba even more.
Wow, well, it looks like we've got Cuba right here on the table. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, one thing about Cuba, you know, 52 million American tourists are planning to go to Cuba once it opens up, and the U.S. and the Cuba are in this process of opening up and thawing relations. And when a tourist first goes to Cuba, the first thing they notice, honestly, are the colors. And I've actually led a couple groups of people there, and that's always the first thing they say. They say, wow, I had no idea the color was so exciting. And the reason that this is a color trend is because Cuba has been shut down since 1960. You know, it's been under the embargo. And so when Americans first go there, what they see is an island nation that is frozen in time. And so everything is just the way it was in the late 50s, and everything's shut down in the 60s. So the colors, the architecture, the cars are refurbished, and of course they have a lot of those Caribbean and Latin colors and, you know, really specific Cuban colors. When you visit Havana for the first time, it just knocks your socks off.
Yeah, so it's kind of like this mid-century time capsule of color.
Exactly, and that's why I think modern quilting is going to really latch onto this color trend, because it's so perfect for what we love to do with fabrics and quilts.
Wonderful. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what colors we have here on the table?
Well, pink, kind of a poppy candy pink, not a fuchsia. Red is a very popular color, but also shades that really refer to the sea. So aqua and ocean blue and green, kind of a seafoam green, are also popular colors, and surprisingly yellow.
Yeah, I can see that, like the light of the Caribbean and kind of like how that all kind of ties together. That's really interesting. I mean, you see these cars and they're so cool, and I never thought about how they look with buildings and stuff.
Right, and boy, some of the photos that I've taken there of the cars in front of the building, which is a different color, that in itself is a really exciting color inspiration.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So what do you think are some other places that might be inspiring to us?
In Cuba, well, I think what's really interesting is color combinations. So for instance, in Havana, you have this crumbling infrastructure, and the reason for that is because the embargo. So all these buildings that are from, some of them go back to the 1500s, but the 1600s, the 1700s, and they're crumbling, and they're gray and charcoal, and then the cobblestone streets. So then you have this juxtaposition of the mid-tone pastels of the cars and some of the buildings, and then the cobblestones and the crumbling stone buildings. And, you know, for quilters, it's interesting to think about colors with, you know, a bright palette with some kind of a neutral combination. And then in addition to that, you've got the color of the sea, the beautiful sea all around, in shades of turquoise, from aqua by the beach to deep teal and blue. And then when you go out to other towns like Cienfuegos or Trinidad, Trinidad is a UNESCO heritage site, you see a whole different palette of colors, but just as interesting. And there they historically have used the pigments of the earth to paint the buildings from the 1700s on, and they're maintaining the colors of those pigments. So that's a completely different color palette from Havana, but still really exciting to see.
Yeah, so these pigments and these colors and the bright colors of the cars and all this stuff, and the fact that Cuba was under embargo for so long, does it have kind of a mid-century feel, or is it, I mean, what did you see there?
Right, well, the heyday in Cuba before it was shut down from the embargo was the 50s, all the way up to 1960.
Yeah.
So there were all kinds of beautiful cars that were coming in and buildings that were being built. So now you can go and visit some of those hotels that were built in the late 50s and see the original mid-century modern furnishings and architecture and lamp fixtures and colors and so on. And there's a lot of inspiration there as well.
Yeah, so this kind of mid-century time capsule of colors, really great, and I think it would be really inspirational to modern quilters. So why don't you tell us about all these beautiful fabrics you have on the table?
Yeah. Well, so I went through and pulled out these specific colors that I see in Cuba from my stash. And you know, I brought both prints and batiks and hand dyes because I think it's interesting to have different options. And you can see here, here's kind of these salmon pink and sort of apricot ice or peach icy, maybe you should say mango icy colors here.
Yeah, that's what I think of the Caribbean when I, yeah.
And then the purples, the lilacs and the purples. And notice, you know, here I don't have anything really dark or bright. These are really those mid-tone type colors. These yellows, a lot of them are that pigment. When you go to Trinidad, you see a lot of this color, and it's literally the ochre color that they historically would mine, grind up, and make into pigments to paint the houses.
Yeah.
And then here we have the colors of the water, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, but both blue and aqua, and you can see that range of shades here. And the green, of course, it's a tropical nation, so there's a lot of green there, but in the cars and in the architecture in particular, these are the kind of mid-tone shades that you see. And then, of course, everywhere is the water. All around you on this island nation is the water. And this is the color that you see at the Malecon, which is the historic stone wall that you see in like James Bond movies, you know, where she dives off into the ocean. But then as you go into deeper water, the color gets deeper and deeper. And when you think about making a quilt and combining colors, what's really exciting sometimes is either to work with complementary colors, which you would see here with the peachy colors and the blue, or analogous colors. So, and that's where you have three colors together on the color wheel. So for instance, a green and a teal and a blue together could be a different way, maybe with a pop of yellow.
Yeah.
And then what I think is really interesting, if you want to hand me those, is to talk about these colors of, you know, what I call the crumbling infrastructure. And these are the buildings that are crumbling, but they're so gracefully crumbling. They have beautiful, you know, carved architectural details and stone carvings. And look what happens when you put these colors next to the grays and the neutrals. And imagine making a quilt out of this and how those colors would just pop.
Yeah, they do seem to just kind of draw it out of them. Yeah.
So here, you know, I picked, again, this is just things from my stash, but this to me is kind of the flow of the water over the cobblestones and the texture of the stone, and you know, this is kind of a water texture.
Oh, yeah.
And this is an ombre, and I think, you know, modern quilters are using more ombres now, and that's why I wanted to show this, but also this, because when you work with something that has an ombre like this, it has a lot of depth. It really gives your piece, either you can use separate pieces and have, you know, 20 different colors.
Yeah, I've seen people use it in piecing, but also as part of like the negative space.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And if you use it in a sashing, that, you know, a long strip that runs the whole length of the ombre, then you get a sense of dimension. It gives it has kind of a glowing quality. So when you think about putting something like this with these colors, look at the, you know, how that would bring another additional layer of interest here.
Now, when you were talking about these cars, you were talking about how some of them are so vibrant against this kind of color palette of both beautiful color and crumbling palette. I mean, are there any pops that you might want to talk about or tell me about? Because it sounded like that was something that when you saw the cars in front of the buildings, like that's what they did, is they popped.
Right, right. Well, I'll show you some of the color combinations that I saw that were so interesting. One of the combinations was like a blue. And they have a tradition where the bottom of the building is always painted a darker color, often kind of a reddish brown. And the reason for that was back in the old days when they had wagons and horses, the mud would come up and splatter on the building, and that darker color at the bottom would hide that. So when you go to Trinidad, you see combinations like this.
Yeah.
Or you see combinations like this. And then, so that's, you know, more of a popping, intense kind of organic color combination.
So we only have a few seconds left, but you have some car fabric here that I can really kind of see it, and I can kind of see this story together.
Okay. Yes. Well, actually, I got so excited that I decided to design some fabrics while I was there. So my husband and I have collaborated, and we're coming out. I'm going to be introducing some fabrics with photos of cars and this layout for quilters.
That's wonderful. I'm really excited. So this is a great way for us to look at how mid-century color can inspire us as quilters.